Welcome to the Internet, live from the Marriott Library at the University of Utah in an undisclosed location in the Logan metropolitan area. This is the Redline Podcast. I'm your host, quote, Sprawl Enjoyer Dunstan, and these are my co-hosts.
Kyle, quote, missing middle, unquote, Holland,
Boo.
and...
Alex, quote, will disclose my location if asked, Fielder. Today we're talking about the most unlikely transit story in recent memory, Brightline. Just how did a private passenger railroad come to the United States in the year of our Lord 2023? Find out after the news.
Brightline is officially open. The first trains from Orlando to Miami rolled just 4 days ago, ushering in a whole new area of passenger rail in the United States. The new line has a top speed of 125 miles an hour and is expected to operate every hour for the near future. Next up on Brightline's agenda, high-speed rail connecting Vegas and Los Angeles with electric trains running up to 200 miles per hour.
Now this is an agenda I can get behind. The real question is it gay?
No.
Only 1 month out of the year?
I mean, it is gay. We're going to learn about how much Republicans hate high-speed rail in this episode, so...
Hey, but it's funded by private real estate investors.
Still still a Marxist agenda.
Yeah, you have to be against popular things.
Yeah, that's how you win elections.
And good things. Yeah, you have to be against progress.
Yeah. You said every hour? Are they doing every hour clock face?
I assume so.
Cool.
There's no reason not to, really.
Gonna look up the schedule real quick.
Yeah, you can look up Brightline's schedule. It is publicly available on the internet. What's funny is I don't think that they changed service levels for Sundays and Saturdays.
Based. Yeah, no, we're right. It's more or less clock face. Plus or minus about 5 minutes. And with, I think, a bonus trip or two thrown in there. Cool.
Exciting. This has been the news.
Do.
Do.
I feel like I'm hitting a cymbal when I do that.
Yeah, the symbol.
You're my favorite cymbal, Alex.
I could be a beatboxer.
You could try. It'd be funny.
I could. So, today we're going to talk about the lovely history of high-speed rail and Brightline in Florida.
Because, oh boy, is there a history.
So I think the most important question is, what is Florida?
It's a good question.
Currently it's a landmass.
Yeah, God willing, it will not be a landmass soon.
Yeah.
Everyone always likes to focus on the negative aspects of climate change. I personally am a climate optimist, but not in the way that I think that will solve climate change. I'm just happy with several of the results, like, for example, Florida no longer existing.
And Salt Lake remaining habitable?
Yes.
Okay. This is one of the takes.
Also, the Netherlands no longer existing. Because then they can't be smug bastards about their damn bike lanes anymore.
Will they run out of money to spend on the dams and such?
I mean, if the water rises 100 feet, I'm not sure what a dam's going to do.
With enough money, you can build basically anything.
You're going to build, like, the entire Hoover Dam along the entire Dutch coast?
Yeah, and it will use all the concrete in the world.
Which will worsen climate change?
Wait a second.
Self-sabotage.
Yeah, the Netherlands owning themselves with facts and logic. So, believe it or not, planning for high-speed rail in Florida actually began as early as the 1960s, when Florida's highways were already becoming massively overburdened by its ongoing population boom.
In the 60s?
Uh-huh.
Damn, they're ahead of the curve.
Well, you gotta remember that the Japanese were, like, starting to develop the Shinkansen at that time, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's suddenly panicking like, oh my gosh, America is becoming irrelevant. The Japanese economy is going to overtake us. And
something, the economy, something.
The same thing we're doing with China now, except different, right?
Yeah.
So...
I'm for nationalism if it gets us competing space race style with trains.
Kyle nationalism era.
Yeah. Which so far it hasn't, but, maybe we'll get there eventually.
Hey, we got the Metroliners out of that, the Amtrak Metroliners.
Oh, cool.
Do you know what that was?
No.
Okay, well, we'll have to do an episode on it someday.
And I mean, we're kind of doing that with California high-speed rail because we're trying to beat everybody else on raw speed.
Yeah, we are. Speed. I am speed. 1 winner, 42 losers. I eat losers for breakfast. Anyway, I hope that's not copyrighted.
That's not how copyright works.
Whatever. So, in 2000, after a federal act in the 1990s allowed 5 corridors in Florida to come under consideration for high-speed rail funding, Florida's voters approved an amendment to the state's constitution requiring the state of Florida connect the state's largest population centers with a network of high-speed
Since when
trains.
did we do policy in the Constitution?
I don't know.
That is insane.
That is one way to run a ballot measure, yeah.
Like, imagine if the Utah Constitution had a provision that's like, hey, the state of Utah is required by the Constitution of the state of Utah to run a 500-mile-an-hour high-speed maglev train to Logan by the year 2024.
Have you ever seen those diagrams of, like, the chain of nuclear command where, like, the president is at the top and then off to the side there is person who installed the button with an arrow squiggling it up? It feels like the voters here are person who installed the button.
Fair. So in response to this referendum, Florida's legislature created the Florida High-Speed Rail Authority, which quickly began laying out plans for how such a system could be built. The initial plan was to connect Lakeland and Tampa to Orlando by 2009, and then extend the system to Miami at a later date.
Oh, yeah, I'm starting to remember this story.
Uh-huh. It's a routing, for those of us who are familiar with Brightline's current route, that may seem suspiciously similar.
It's almost as if the corridors were meticulously planned well in advance.
Yeah, I have this little map that I've put in the thing here, and it's just literally the Brightline.
It's the Brightline map with 2 lines instead of 1.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So there you go. Isn't that fun? But then, Jeb! You know, like the memes from 2016, whatever. It's just like, Jeb!
Jeb.
Please clap. Yeah. Thanks, Jeb. The governor of the state, Jeb Bush, vetoed funding appropriated by the Florida legislature for the line. But hope wasn't lost because the FHSRA moved forward with selecting a build, maintain, run contractor using federal money.
With federal money. This is billions upon billions of dollars of effectively free federal money.
Yeah, it was like $1 billion federal dollars.
Jeez.
I thought it was several billion.
That's the second time.
So, crap ton of federal money. Why on earth would you veto free federal money for your state?
Then disaster struck again. Jeb passed a ballot measure in 2004, only 4 years after the initial measure was passed, to remove the requirement that the state build a high-speed rail system from its constitution.
Why? Are you trying to dismantle the high-speed rail?
Republican moment.
Jeb
Jeb.
moment.
Jeb moment.
Yeah, because we can't have nice things.
Yeah, well, you see, okay,
Bill with federal money.
Alex, let's cosplay. You be a normal person, and I will be Jeb Bush. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna start out here. So, cars are great and represent freedom. Trains are bad and cultural Marxism / other fear-mongering term. How do you feel about trains now, average Florida citizen?
It would be cool to have a train.
Too bad, because I have just passed a ballot measure making it so you can't have a train.
No.
After vetoing funding.
After vetoing
Personally.
Personally. Jeb Bush was just really against this whole thing, apparently.
Which
Why?
is quite clearly against the will of the voters.
I don't quite understand why Republicans are so, neurotically opposed to any form of train, ever. Even when it would probably make money like this one would have.
Despite being pro, economic development or whatever, and pro-highway infrastructure, but not pro-other infrastructure.
Trains are
I'll
communism.
Never get that one.
Look it up, kids.
You heard it here
I
first.
saw it on... Yeah, I heard it on Turning Point USA.
Your favorite source of reliable
The
facts.
My
Koch
favorite source
brothers
of-
told you that.
Personally.
The Koch brothers broke into my bedroom last night and whispered in my ear, "Trains are communism."
You joke, but I'm sure government officials like this one have stories like that.
They might. We're going to have to do a little episode, like a mini episode, maybe a Patreon episode on just how damaging the Koch brothers have been to transit sometime. Because, like, they own the single organization that always kills transit projects. Like, they killed the original Austin rail project. They killed Nashville's light rail plan. They killed Cincinnati's light rail
By
plan.
what? Just hardcore high-budget lobbying?
And, like, campaigning against the voter referenda.
Bruh.
Yeah.
Why?
Koch
What
brothers.
is their interest in campaigning against
Do you know who the
trains?
Koch brothers are?
Oil or something?
They're the epitome of evil.
Yeah. Well, and now it's just Koch brother because one of them is dead.
Oh.
But
Halfway there.
Alex was celebrating there. I just wanted the listeners to know that. But yeah, no, they're big oil billionaires, so they always advocate against transit because it actually does have an effect on oil sales, if you believe it.
Interesting.
So the FHSRA, that is really a mouthful. It's much more of a mouthful than
CHSR.
CHSR.
At least that one rolls
or
out.
CHSRA.
CAHSR.
No, there's no CA in there. It's just C.
No, it's CA.
Is it?
Yeah.
CAHSRA?
No. CAHSR.
No, it's the California High-Speed Rail Authority.
Usually people just refer to the project.
Okay, fair enough. But the FHSRA was largely defunct for 5 years until Obama's Congress passed the American Rescue Plan in the wake of the 2008 stock crash and bank crisis. That bill contained $8 billion for new high-speed intercity transportation, and Florida's corridor was eligible for funding again.
Woohoo! Thanks,
Hooray! And due to a series of other states' governors, notably Wisconsin and Indiana, rejecting the funding, and the fact that much of the line had already been planned,
Stop rejecting federal funding, governors.
the Wisconsin one is actually very famous, I believe.
Why did they reject their federal funding?
Trains are communism.
And free
And
mon-
Obama is the Antichrist and was born in Nigeria. Look, I had like some hardcore, Republican parents during the Obama era. I can tell you all sorts of interesting things that you probably don't know about Obama.
Nobody knows about Obama.
Do you know that he drinks children's blood?
Based.
And that his wife is a transgender? Oi, Gewalt. But yeah, they got all this money because Wisconsin and Indiana are stupid, right? And so, the FHSRA is like thrilled, and they're like, all right, we're going to restart the plan. They start looking for contractors again. They start doing more planning and studies, and like they even had the Florida Department of Transportation put in like improved median barriers in the places where they were planning to put the tracks. Like
Nice.
they were getting the ball rolling. And then Florida Governor Rick Scott rejected the funding.
Why?
Republicans.
Do you really think it's in the interest of the people who voted for you to reject free federal money?
Yes. And this is so funny because no one except California ended up with any of this money. So, like, most of the federal money that CHSR has had to this day are just
Stuff other states have
actively rejected.
Go California on not being entirely stupid.
See, the thing is, I could see other states being like, why is our tax money going to California for trains? After rejecting
because
it
you
themselves.
didn't want it.
Because you
right
didn't want
there.
My brother in Christ, you rejected the funding.
Finders, keepers, losers, weepers, or whatever.
Yes. So this effectively forever ended the dream of publicly owned high-speed rail in Florida. But thankfully, we had benevolent corporate overlords to do it for us. So, hooray.
Woohoo.
Wahoo! So, after the death of the Florida high-speed rail corridor as a public enterprise, hungry investors began looking at the Miami-Orlando section of the route with interest. The line was one of the strongest potential rail corridors in the country. It would connect the country's 9th largest metro to one of our great tourist cities on the other end. Plus, a decent line could be faster than driving. There was real potential here.
Woohoo.
Yippee!
So, Florida East Coast Industries, which is the owner of the Florida East Coast Railroad that Brightline runs for a good amount of its distance along, created a subsidiary called All Aboard Florida, which began working on an environmental review soon after the FHSRA folded and began construction on their starter line between West Palm Beach and Miami in 2015. And this is the birth of Brightline.
Viola.
Yeah. They financed their lines, both to West Palm Beach and the later extension to Miami, with a series of large tax-exempt bonds to the tune of about $1.75 billion.
Oh, this is an interesting topic to hit on, because as much as we congratulate Brightline on completing these privately funded, owned, and operated projects, they wouldn't be possible without loads of government support in acquiring and leasing the right-of-way, and providing large bonds, and even, with Brightline West soon, large grants.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how you historically do this sort of thing. Like, the reason that American railroads were built in the first place is because the federal government provided enormous incentives to build railroads across the whole country.
Namely, absolutely huge amounts of land that the American government had
previously
decided that they owned.
Well, and then enforced that decision via killing every Native American possible.
And then handing out the land that they had decided to lay claim on to the railroads.
But
Yeah,
So-
like they would get like, oh, go ahead, Alex.
it's the same thing with the telephone companies and the electrical companies, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
And, you know, they would give these companies just 10 miles on either side of the track that they built. They would own all the land. And so they could make a butt ton of money off of real estate development to incentivize building the railroads, which is surprisingly somewhat similar to what Brightline is doing.
I
If
know,
you look
right?
at any of their stations, there are 4 billion story high-rises next to every single one of them.
Faced. So I'm by no means saying that this latest iteration of this model is bad, but it's a good thing for the public to be aware of, the amount of government support and funds that have gone into projects like these.
Very true.
Especially as we consider future projects.
Yeah. And so the project was given its official name later that year. It was to be called Brightline, which is very much like a corporate speak sort of name, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
it's better than All Aboard Florida.
Or fart. Nev, here's a fun fact for you that will be in the upcoming Metro or Washington Metro series soon. The Washington Metro was almost called Federal Area Rapid Transit instead of WMATA, which stands for fart. So Brightline was to be a conventional 79-mile-per-hour diesel railroad using 4-car Siemens trains with a locomotive on either end.
Because get this, it's cheap.
It is very
Trademark.
cheap, yeah. It was really more of a commuter line than anything else in its first line,
That makes sense. The first line was short.
relatively speaking,
And, diesel technical limitations.
or something.
Or something.
So, after 3 years of work and several legal battles with some of the more NIMBY-ish counties along the way, Brightline inaugurated hourly passenger service between West Palm Beach and Miami in early 2018, and Fort Lauderdale and Miami later that year.
Unfortunately not Fort Lauderdale, Texas.
No, not Fort Lauderdale, Texas. This
Inshallah, someday.
is Brightline to Texas?
If it
Yeah.
happened in Florida, it could happen
Okay.
in Texas.
This is true.
They are working on it in Texas.
Yeah, Texas Central is building a high-speed rail line between Dallas and Houston.
You mean a
there you
high-speed
go.
communist line?
Yes, to transport the communists in Dallas and Houston, which are both evil lib cities, to each other.
CRT, Communist Rapid Transit.
Correct. Also known as critical race theory.
That is good.
I think we've just invented the mother of all conservative conspiracy theories, and we probably shouldn't release this episode to the public.
Hey, it's a pretty good coping strategy for somewhat boneheaded leadership that rejects large funding opportunities.
That is good.
Oh my gosh, communist rapid transit. I can totally see that, because they're going to build an extension of the Portland Yellow Line pretty soon to Vancouver when they replace the bridge. I can totally see, Vancouver NIMBYs just, sticking, stop CRT, Communist Rapid Transit, from destroying our town.
All those Portland communists putting the cart before the horse with their social programs, also known as literal communism, as written in Marx in his book.
Yeah, I read the Communist Manifesto, and on the first page it's just build a train to Vancouver.
Yeah. And on the second page is legalized large-scale manufacture and distribution of crystal meth.
Correct. So, work was to begin on the line to Orlando's International Airport in 2019, but not until they took an extremely weird detour.
Virgin Trains, USA? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Filled with real virgin communists.
No. So you guys know who Richard Branson
is?
is?
He's the space guy, isn't he?
Yeah, he owns Virgin Space and Virgin Airlines and previously Virgin Trains in the UK until those went under. He just has this weird brand of Virgin and tries to slap it on everything.
It's cool that he has a brand for all his weird ventures, but of all the things you could call your thing, why this?
Because it's Virgin. So, yeah, Brightline decided to take up a branding deal with Virgin, which is the pet company of weirdo billionaire Richard Branson. They were meant to get investor capital out of the deal, but then didn't, because Richard Branson did not follow up on his promise. So they rebranded back to Brightline after 2 years in 2020. Then Virgin brought a lawsuit against Brightline for $251 million for breach of contract, and I believe the case is still pending.
That's lovely, and not going to cause any problems for our current favorite private
hero.
Train company. Yeah, the protagonist of this
The
story.
protagonist of this episode, Brightline.
Which needs to spend lawyer dollars on some lawsuit about naming. It's not even about right-of-way or noise or having to look at trains. It's about the damn name.
Yeah, it needs to be called Virgin Trains. USA.
I'm not a fan of either name,
Alex
but
would.
I do prefer Brightline. No,
You don't like Brightline?
I think
it's
it's
just kind
alright.
of boring. I don't know.
I respect that they've got a distinct, albeit simple brand, with the bright yellow and the name Brightline.
And the weird little L, bright line.
Yeah, in the space of passenger trains in the U.S., you don't really need to distinguish yourself that much.
Because there's only one brand to compete with.
Yeah, so as long as you can tell it apart from Amtrak and not immediately forget what it's called, they're doing pretty good.
All you have to do to tell it apart from Amtrak is just not make everything out of stainless steel.
Yeah, or get it to average more than 30 miles an hour.
I do love the stainless steel look, though. But I guess Brightline, as a name, makes sense for the Sunshine State.
Yeah.
I also like the stainless steel. I guess I'm controversial in that I think it looks good and intimidating.
Well, you see, Brightline can afford paint, and they want to show that off.
So can Amtrak.
Well, now they can.
I know.
They couldn't afford paint?
Back in the days of the original stainless
that's
steel
fair.
look.
The rainbow
Stainless
plate, yeah.
just looks timeless. I don't know. I'm a fan.
Yeah, it looks space age.
Bring back stainless, but with trains
But
that
don't
have 3
break.
times the average speed and don't break.
Yeah, we should just build like, we should have the fastest train in the world on the Northeast Corridor. It goes like 250 miles an hour, right? But it's just stainless steel on the outside, corrugated stainless steel.
And it looks like every 60s train ever manufactured.
Yeah, just for funsies, just to show that we can as a country.
Just to own the libs or whatever.
Yeah.
Or communists, sorry. I forgot who the antagonist of this story was.
Yeah, we're talking about communist rapid transit here. So, construction began on the 170-mile brand new line to Orlando in 2019. This new line will be faster than the old line, with trains running 90 to 125 miles per hour, the fastest in the Southeast by a relatively large margin.
And also noticeably beats the highway completely all the time.
Yes, and flying most of the time.
Yeah, which is good. So they picked a speed that was fast enough and
but not too fast.
Didn't waste any money making it faster.
Yeah, well, they maybe should have made their original alignment faster.
Yeah, probably.
But there are too many grade crossings, so which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, doesn't this new line have, like, almost complete grade separation?
Yeah, but that's because it runs in the middle of a freeway.
Well, they'll do it.
Yeah. Service was interrupted by COVID-19 from 2020 to late 2021, November 8th to be exact, but construction on the Orlando line, as well as the infill Boca Raton and Aventura stations, continued throughout the pandemic.
Cool.
The line to Orlando opened just a few days ago on September 22nd, 2023. It provides 16 daily round trips on a 240-mile, 3.5-hour line.
That is a quite tidy average speed.
It's an average speed about 69 miles an hour.
That's great.
I'm not kidding. Yeah, well, for context, the Acela average is about 80?
Well,
depends on the route segment and the schedule you bought.
No, like Boston to DC average is about 80, I think.
That's a Acela Frisbee.
Let's find out.
So I do think it's quite funny that Brightline is averaging almost Acela speeds.
Well, you see, it's built in the middle of nowhere, Florida, instead of in, like, the most populated part of the country.
Okay, or they could have just not been cowards and built more tunnels.
Yeah, it costs money.
And mostly the Boston segment's the problem, to be real.
Yeah.
You can just look up average Acela speed, Kyle.
Oh, I could do that.
I'm doing it now.
440 miles.
The average speed over the entire route is 70.3 miles per hour.
Yeah, there you go.
According to
about the same.
Amtrak. So, about the same as Acela, which is quite good.
Yep.
Now, it's not about the same as Acela between D.C. and Washington. Or, excuse me, between D.C. and New York. That's quite a fast section, but the Boston segment really slows down the whole thing. So,
well,
rails exist in Boston. Challenge impossible.
70 miles an hour. I know I would rather spend 3.5 hours on a train having free time to do whatever than in a car.
And also actually going 70 miles an hour instead of theoretically going 70 miles an hour and not being able
no
to read a book.
traffic. You can focus on other stuff.
yeah, the thing about Florida is that it just has abysmal traffic even in the middle of nowhere. So, so anyway, so let's discuss some problems with Brightline. Number one being that there are way too many grade crossings.
As anybody will have seen in the news.
And in some insanely dangerous locations as well. Like across like freeway on-ramps, there are some Brightline grade crossings. Like some 10-lane super arterial roads, there are grade crossings. Sometimes it runs in the middle of the street like a light rail. It's a little interesting.
God's oldest and crappiest right-of-way.
Yeah.
Man, they really were on a budget building that first line, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. And I wasn't able to find an exact number, but it seems as though there are probably in excess of 200 grade crossings on a 240-mile line.
We were comparing to Acela speeds earlier, and that's essentially completely grade separated.
And no quiet zones either.
On Brightline?
Yeah. So it just
That's
every
a
2 seconds,
budget-ass line.
oh, kill the car. Oh, kill the pedestrian. Oh, that was the last manatee.
Regional reference.
Yeah, and you think that I'm exaggerating here, but more than 88 people have died in collisions with Brightline trains since the line began service only 5 years ago.
And that's not even accounting for injuries and property damage.
No, 88 people have just straight up been killed by Brightline.
That's CRT for you.
And as is well known...
Scoreboard.
And as is well known, we can't fix driver and pedestrian behavior at, like, the train construction level. But what we can do is get rid of the goddamn grade crossings.
Yeah, that would be obscenely expensive, though.
Yeah.
So you'd have to elevate, like, all 120 miles of track that are... Anyway... other problems. Alan Fisher says the seats suck. So there's one.
I don't know. We haven't ridden it yet. We can't comment.
Yeah, I can't comment on that, but that's what Alan Fisher says.
Next one. Not electrified.
Why? No one knows.
Yeah, this is totally the sort of thing that it's relatively cost-effective to electrify. Like, for the original line, they're running in a bunch of weird places and not quite so much in just corridor as with the new line, and they also had no money. Now they have money and they have corridor, so the electrification works out pretty well on paper.
Another problem, there are some bad bridges on the original line that people are afraid may wash away if there's a hurricane. Florida things. Yeah. And then it also has some freight delays still because the Florida East Coast Railway, which is its parent company, shares some track with Brightline. And the Orlando station is at the airport.
Oh, absolutely. It sucks ass. It's in the airport.
What's wrong with that?
It should be central to other things.
There is no central anything. It's Orlando.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when it goes to Disney, it'll be better. But anyway, those are the problems.
I don't quite understand the freight delays if they have the same parent company, but
it's America. Every train is required to have a freight delay at least once a day, otherwise you get shot.
Yeah.
By the unions or something.
Or
I don't
canceled
know.
or something. I don't know. Whatever the cool kids are doing.
Yeah. But there are some very good things about Brightline as well. First of all, as we discussed, it's quite fast. It's about the same speed as Acela, which is very funny.
True fact. Despite being diesel.
Yeah, and...
having a lower top speed.
Yeah. Well, significantly lower top speed, like 35 miles an hour lower, so...
The main thing it has going for it is a lack of stops and being in the middle of nowhere, Florida, instead of in a legacy rail corridor in the dense populated areas.
Stations have also been a massive catalyst for transit-oriented development.
True fact.
Nearly every Brightline station is already surrounded by massive condo high-rises.
Since Brightline is owned by a real estate investment group.
And is using it the old-fashioned way that railroads make money, which is real estate.
Yeah, this seems like a really good idea because it motivates some dense development way better than the government asking nicely has ever done.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah. It also shows the potential of higher speed rail to the rest of the country, who are now going to go and gawk at it for a couple years to try and get the same thing in their state.
That's very true, especially since it's mostly privately run.
Although I will note that Illinois and Michigan were doing this before it was cool, so...
Yeah.
There you go.
What do they got?
The line between St. Louis and Chicago is 110 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
And most of the line between Detroit and Chicago.
Yeah, I think the main thing to show off from Brightline is, A, the private thing, and B, it's a new build line in a place that traditionally has basically no transit.
Well, and it's a lot more frequent than anything else. Like, it is now the second most frequent intercity train service in the United States after the Northeast Regional, but not the Acela. Acela runs less trains per day than Brightline.
Well, because Acela is so bloody expensive, they don't pull that high of passenger volumes.
No, it's not even that. Like, every single Acela train that has ever been run is full. They don't have enough rolling stock to run more trains.
That would do it. Classic Amtrak move.
So only the Northeast Regional is more frequent than than
Yeah.
Brightline.
I assume Brightline doesn't have to buy America.
Private company.
Yeah, where are they buying their trains?
Siemens.
Manufactured in America.
Yeah.
So Buy America worked, in other words.
Well, yes, actually.
It made...
Finally yielded some
It
fruit.
finally yielded at-scale, cost-effective domestic manufacturing of the things
Of
it
rail
targeted.
equipment, yeah.
Congrats.
There's no cafe car, though.
Yeah, that's kind of lame.
That is extremely lame. That is like the best part of any Amtrak ride by far is the cafe car and the
yeah.
lounge car. Yeah. Nobody wants to sit in their actual seat for 3 hours. You want to go sit in like the
No.
little lounge thing and eat like...
I would much rather sit at
pizza.
the table.
Yeah. But anyway, I digress.
Amtrak
Yeah, maybe
pizza
for the
oven
West
salad.
route.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Although that's not
Onboard
going to be a very
casino.
long route.
Yeah,
like in
it's
terms
not.
of time.
Because they're going way faster, and it's shorter.
Like it'll be like probably the time equivalent of riding Frontrunner from Ogden to Provo.
Really?
If not less.
No, probably about the same.
I
Yeah.
guess I just can't comprehend fast speeds.
Not to mention you also have to get from actual LA
I
to
know.
the line.
No, the line's going to go into Union Station.
Oh, I thought they were just going to stop at a Metrolink station.
I heard Union Station.
Cool. Well, that's good.
So anyway,
On shitty Metrolink track. But that's way better
Well,
than no through running.
look, I mean, California High Speed Rail is going to spend the last 2 hours of its life on shitty Caltrain track, so it's, not as though...
Oh, no. Well, also on shitty Metrolink track, which will take even longer per unit distance.
I mean, you got to be honest. Shitty Caltrain track is still pretty good.
Yeah, they're making huge improvements to the Caltrain track.
Well, and it's always been pretty good. If you
Yeah.
remember correctly, the whole thing is grade separated.
And then they're like, hey, FRA, how fast can we run through grade crossing? FRA, 125. All right, let's do 125, electrified. And hope nobody brings, like, a balloon near the overhead lines.
Yeah. And then finally, it's transit service in a region of the country that as a whole doesn't have super great transit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is putting it politely as well. So...
And hopefully, inshallah, this will lead to the development of the local transit systems in places Brightline serves.
Orlando, cough, cough, because Miami's pretty good, but Orlando, cough, 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 cough.
Cough, cough. Like, auto train. The fact that the auto train ever succeeded as a concept shows how bad Orlando transit sucks.
This is true. I hadn't thought about that, but it is quite an indictment of Orlando Transit that auto train exists.
Yeah.
So, the future. Brightline wants to expand to Tampa, which is further west, with either a Disney or a Universal Orlando station.
Yeah. Hopefully just an I-401 with local transit options to both resorts. But we'll see.
We'll see. And then Brightline West, the 200-mile-an-hour Vegas to LA line, probably that may open as soon as 2027. Ambitious, certainly.
Have they finished their, grant thing? Has that gotten approved?
No.
Last I checked, that was the only blocker.
Yeah, so it probably is happening by 2027, which is kind of wild.
I hope this grant goes through, because if it doesn't, we're back another 10 years.
Yeah, hopefully the
Thumbs
grant
up.
comes through, and then do you think they would be able to do an EIS within, a year?
I don't know, because it is it is meant to be running mostly in the median of I-15, which is
Yeah. Basically already
low
EIS'd.
environmentally impact. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you. I'm not an expert on EISs, but it's possible.
And I believe they're adding some, wildlife crossings and such.
Oh, great.
Which, I don't know, people get some EIS points, if you will.
Good. So, yeah. I would also like to mention that California High Speed Rail should not be compared to this project in any way or to Brightline West. It is of a wholly different caliber than either of these projects by a long shot. And I would like to just remind everyone of that fact.
Yeah, both Brightlines are essentially conventional railroads.
Whereas California High Speed Rail will be the fastest train in the world.
And will also be running in an almost entirely new build alignment.
Because there is no good alignment for it. So,
With some absolutely insane grade separations.
yeah. So just don't fall into the trap of letting people try and be like, oh, Brightline built the two of the best trains, blah, 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 but California high-speed rail is stupid and bad.
For starters, California will have 2 bloody tracks.
Yes, that is true.
And electric wires.
And
grade separations.
as we mentioned, be the fastest train on the face of the planet.
Yep.
So don't compare the two, and support California high-speed rail at Gavin Newsom. Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make?
Ooh, I wonder if California high-speed rail will set any land speed records during testing.
That is entirely possible.
Because during the building of the TGV,
the
TGV,
thank you.
The French set a number of rail land speed records.
I think you probably could on California high-speed rail, just because parts of it are just so ramrod straight with no grades.
Yeah.
Like through the Central Valley, it's just like 200 miles of God's fastest, flattest track.
Yeah, but the problem is in the Central Valley, they've designed in a bunch of curves so they can take at speed, but probably not more than speed. Some segments of the TGV were deliberately built for the purpose of R&D, so they made them excessively dead straight and flat with, like, excessively good everything, so they could literally go test the next generation of rail technology.
That is so based. That is the most based thing I've ever heard in my life.
This is the sort of stuff you can do when you build rail on the regular and have, like, ongoing funding for it.
Very true. Any closing comments by anyone else?
I'm just impressed by Brightline, to be honest. I think the fact it's a private company is a big deal for a lot of states and makes me hopeful that maybe Utah could maybe have something like this one day.
Maybe one day. Probably after I'll die from climate change.
Yeah, probably.
He's impressed, and it's cool that it's private. Maybe Utah will have something like this someday.
That'd be cool. I don't know where it would go because we don't have 2 large metro areas.
It would connect to Vegas and
Boise.
Via St. George and also Boise. It would basically
that would be so expensive.
It would basically be the desert wind glued into the what's the other one? Pioneer. Yeah.
Well, I think Amtrak may be planning to operate those 2 as a continuous route, so we'll see.
Cool.
But anyway, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and to follow and leave us a rating on iTunes and Spotify. If you like what we do here, you can become a member on Patreon. Patrons receive early access to our regular content, exclusive content, and occasional merch drops. Speaking of patrons... Ow.
Oh, sorry.
We have, at Super Duper Double Tracked Electrified to Vegas to Los Angeles at Union Station Frontrunner tier, we have Zach Adams, and all of those things minus one thing, generic GT.
All of those things minus the dining car.
Yeah. At regular Frontrunner tier, $10 a month, we have Curtis Herring, Devin Zander, McKay Ransom, Mike Christensen, Phobos2390.
And at our $5 a month Redline tier, we have Brian Smith, Christopher Whaley, DJ Highwell Watkins, Elijah Hensler, Jacob Whitecotton, Jesse Mayo, Reluctant LA Resident, and Robert P. Walsh.
At our Blue Line tier, $3, we have Alex Dykelski, Ben Busath, Bradley Bondi, Ethan McDonald, Evelyn, G4, Gonza 12, John Heron Gorman, Martine Hecker Martinez, Matt Gray, Seth, and Zach Verstott. Thank you all.
Yeah, and at our super duper already double tracked and electrified Green Line tier, we have Benjamin Wood and Kapil.
7% grades just for fun.
So true. I love light rail. All right, goodbye.
Yeah, thank you all. Goodbye.